Hi, Valentina. Hi, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Evelina. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. We are pre-recording this session. So for anyone who's not having their answers responded to this time, we'll make sure we'll get back to you via DMs or comments. So please feel free to still engage with us as we are going on holidays, and we're pre-recording some discussions in advance. So so last week we were discussing disability and accessibility, which kind of led us on to touching on to identity, right? And how some of those different labels then shape who we are and shape our identity and self-expression. So what are your thoughts on that, Valentina? What you were able to look into this week?
Yeah, so I think identity is a really fascinating subject area and really spans so many kind of other topics, and it affects how, our relationship with the external world, but also our conception of ourselves. And obviously that's reciprocal. And something that I've been kind of looking into recently is about how different environments will bring out different parts of our identity, and conversely, some encourage certain parts of identities, but also some inhibit parts where, we don't feel our identity is safe in that space or in that environment. And so that part of our identity we switch off or we keep in the background, and other parts of our identities we then bring to the fore. I mean, I think people, anyone with, anyone will have the familiarity of having, certain parts of themselves that get expressed when they're with their family or with their kind of closest friends. Other parts of their identity will be present at work, and some parts of their identities will not be present at work. Also, anyone from a marginalized community will know that certain parts of their identity will feel welcome and safe in the public sphere, and others will be kept more to safer other spheres, kind of their family, or thinking about gender, for example, if it might be somebody with a similar gender identity or a gender history to them. And so, just kind of looking at that and thinking about then how our, in workplaces, for example, thinking about how we run our organizations, how can we affect our environment to make sure that people feel safe to express all parts of their identity in a work environment? Because being able to express your identity, or even just have your identity feel safe in a room, is such an important part of overall psychological safety. And that really, really affects how well we are on, on a grander scale, but also within the context of an organization and working with others. If we are able to bring in parts of our identity into the room that otherwise we might not feel safe to do so, we're bringing in new ideas, we're bringing in parts of society that exist, that are there, but otherwise, might not feel welcome. And actually that is also so valuable. And it means that we're in a much closer relationship between the ideas we're creating, the ideas that we are actioning, and actually what's happening in the world, rather than trying to create something for the real world but create it in an environment that is kind of enclosed or exclusive, with certain elements of identity. So that's kind of how I've been thinking about it. And I wonder if you kind of have thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I really like that you are focusing on this kind of different parts of ourselves, right? Because I think even if we think, okay, so, what is identity? What's the definition of identity? Identity is not who you are, right? Identity, we can have a lot of identities that doesn't necessarily fully express, who you are at the core behind it, right? And very often identity is associated with specific labels, with specific communities we belong to, with specific activities we do, specific gender, with specific job titles and roles, and you as a mother, father, specific roles really we play, like you said, in specific environments, right? But, if you can bring a lot of, I think every identity will have their own skills, abilities, limitations, beliefs attached to it. And therefore, if we're only operating from that one filter, we are limiting our true full potential, right? And if you have, let's say, if let's say as a mother, I can be very caring and loving, but I don't bring that part of myself to my work where, I can be quite straightforward and quite ruthless. Right now I'm compromising the quality of my relationships that I can build, let's say with my employees, with my colleagues, right? So yeah, it's important to realize that identity is not necessarily who you are. It's and I think, like we mentioned in a previous session, that when you attach your identity to who you are, that's where you start having a lot of mental health issues. That's when you start having kind of breakdown of your own meaning and purpose of your life, because it takes resilience away. You see yourself through that one lens, and it doesn't allow you to adapt to all of those different circumstances or those environments. One thing that comes to my mind as well is that I've been delivering during the summer, I've been delivering some purpose sessions to British Retail Consortium leadership summer schools. And I talked about process of becoming, right? And being your true self, bringing your whole self to work and understanding your true purpose. And also at the same time, always yearning for more, right? Wanting to develop, have some sort of kind of the future ideal identity, like who you would like to become in order to achieve your biggest goals and your biggest ambitions, right? So I had this question when people said, so, what's the difference here between, okay, I need to be more of me, but I also need to go on this journey of becoming someone, right? Greater, this best version of myself. And I think that's the difference really between kind of your authentic self and your identity, right? Because identity is supposed to be malleable, changeable. It should reflect different roles and different situations that we play in life and in work. But who you are at the core, and allowing to bring that to all of these different aspects, it's something that goes beyond, and it's so much deeper. So yeah, it's interesting to explore this kind of, be more of myself, but also there's this process of becoming and always evolving and not necessarily attaching to one specific environment or one specific, job title or responsibility and so on. So we can just be more resilient and more flexible.
Certainly, because identity is one of those things that can, like beliefs, it's very tied in with beliefs, but can be empowering and stimulate to grow, but it can also be limiting. If we believe I am not the kind of person that does that, or I am not able to do that, and we hold that as part of our identity and then as part of who we are, then that can be limiting. Whereas understanding our identities as malleable, I think it's very natural to want to hold on to certain elements of our identities and see it as quite firm and rigid, because that gives us a sense of control, and it gives us a sense of self, when there's often lots of competing influences around us. And I recognize the value of that, but at the same time, there's a real value in recognizing the malleability of our identities. I'm not the same person that I was when I was 5 years old.
Exactly. Or even, today and yesterday, right? There's already some new learnings and some new developments that new journey that we've gone on. And it's interesting as well that you're kind of talking about this malleability. And I did quite a lot of research about, I kind of noticed those patterns that when people attach themselves to one specific part of identity, that it becomes a problem, right? So let's say, if mother defines herself as a mother and that's all that she's ever known, what happens to her and to her purpose and happiness in life when her kids grow up and leave the house, right? If some professional identifies themselves with specific job title and role, what happens once they retire, right? And usually all of their life and meaning and purpose completely falls apart, right? They as a person fall apart because there is this identity that holds them into the psychological sense of safety of this is who I am. So it's not the identity itself, it can be used as a tool, saying I would like to become this person, this identity, and you can constantly kind of work towards and develop these new skills, new abilities, new beliefs and values to to support your personal development journey, or you can, or it can be a limitation where you just attach yourself to, this is who I am, and therefore I cannot do anything else. And this is very common in both, you know, some of these kind of high performing environments, but also in mental health, because I don't know, I speak to, let's say, some CEOs, executives in their executive coaching sessions, right? And I would ask questions like, when was the last time you cried? And somebody would say, oh, you know, I cannot be vulnerable. I cannot express this and that because I'm a CEO, you know, I'm a leader of the company. I need to, you know, have this strong image and strong identity. And again, because they associate themselves just with that part, they don't bring other more human, more vulnerable parts into work. And, you know, how it would look like if you did, right? How it would look like if you align those values and you express some of those other parts in a way that doesn't necessarily, you know, make you look weak and so on. So it's very interesting to start some of those conversations and to explore people's relationships with their labels. And, you know, it, as much as it's true in those kind of high performance environment as well, when you look at athletes, right, you know, they're defined by those external goals, by external achievements, and it can become addictive, right? Because now they are defined, I am, you know, Olympic medalists, right? They defined by that, and their life and meaning sometimes loses value outside of that. So they become addicted to that success, and to the point where there is no more, they can't push anymore. And it creates a lot of mental health issues then as a result of that. And then with those mental health conditions, when you think about this, you have those labels, and people don't say, I feel depressed, I feel anxious. Now it's I am, right? And I am, therefore I cannot do X, you know, I am this and I am that. And it also becomes a limitation. So shifting it from this is who I am to maybe this is what happened to me, this is just part of my experience, this is how parts of my past is expressing itself in different shapes and forms. This is how certain biological constructs are expressing themselves in those forms, but not necessarily identifying ourselves with it, can be really, really powerful tool for that development. And yeah, so, you know, I kind of noticed this pattern that it's attachment to identity that is a problem. So I was thinking, then why do we attach to those identities? You know, why we know that sometimes it's not serving us, and yet we are so, you know, clinging to some of those aspects of ourselves. And it's something that you've already mentioned is it really goes back to our psychological sense of safety, right? Because sometimes in the middle of the turmoil, trauma, change, it gives us that feeling of constant, that feeling of safety. And when we lack psychological safety in other areas of our life, we become much more inclined from neurological point of view to seek for that safety and create those attachments to those sometimes false constructs of our identity that will then give us this perceived sense of safety. And as soon as that becomes something that keeps you safe, it becomes very, very difficult to work and to change that, because any external input or attempt to adjust that will feel like a threat to who you are. So it can be quite difficult to work with those as well.
Certainly. And that's a useful thing, I think, for people to remember, especially in times of turmoil and change, is that we always want to have an anchor somewhere. That might be in an aspect of our identity, it might be in an aspect of our circumstances or our relationships, but that anchor can give us the feeling of safety and security. And I suppose, you know, it's natural to do that. It's natural to want to place that anchor in various parts, or whatever feels like the most accessible and secure part of ourselves or our circumstances or our lives. But to just recognize that when we place that anchor, what are we also holding ourselves back from? You know, if we're anchored in this thing, how far can I reach for this thing? And I think it's useful. It's, you know, we all still want to place our anchors, but just to recognize what might I be limiting myself by putting it here, and understanding that we do always have the power to shift that.
And it's interesting, as you are aware of Robert Dill's work as well, you know, he has those neurological levels of identity that, you know, I really like that as a model, because it looks at, what does it even mean to have that identity in those different contexts? And how is it loaded with specific behaviors in specific contexts? How it's underlined with specific values and beliefs, specific skills and abilities, where, sometimes in one specific environment, we are able to perform, and yet we are not able to do exactly the same thing in completely different circumstances, right? When you consider even things like confidence. Let's say some clients come to me and they say, well, I ask, what do you want? What do you want out of the sessions? And confidence comes as one of these very, very common themes that they say, well, I want to be more confident. Who wouldn't, right? Confidence is such a alluring ability to have. But when you start looking a little bit deeper and you're looking at, for what purpose you want that confidence and where do you lack, and then also where do you actually have it, it really opens up perspective that this is not something that I am, I'm confident or I'm not confident, right? Again, this kind of attachment to identity, that even confidence in itself is something that you do, and it's an ability that manifests differently in specific contexts. So you might not be confident speaking on a stage, but you might be incredibly confident around your family and friends, or, going out dating and chatting up strangers, right? That requires confidence, or could be other way around, right? You can be so brave and confident speaking in front of, big audiences on a stage, but then there might be a very specific situation in your personal life where you just don't feel any confidence of being able to address some situation. So when you put that in a context, then you realize that this is not just who I am. Actually, it's a resource that can be transferred from one environment to another. And by understanding how do you create your own confidence in that specific situation, you can nearly kind of model that excellence of how did I construct that confidence for myself in that circumstance. Therefore, I can now tap into that resource and transfer it into other different environments.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's a really nice note to kind of round off on, because it leads into practices and processes, that tools that we can actually use. The concept of our identities being malleable and our abilities being malleable is all well and good, but actually looking at those tools and how to do that, I think is kind of the next step, for anybody watching this thinking like, oh, that sounds great. Like, I want to do that. Then
how exactly you do this. And I think, what's important as well, that, when we look at those tools, that as well, we don't look at them as boxes in which, again, we package ourselves into to become somebody, right? It's important as well that we look at those tools that can be flexible, malleable. And I think, to me, like my own approach to this kind of levels of identity, I've created my own model when I actually flipped it upside down, from the way Robert Dilts is using. And instead of starting with environment and looking at each environment, your behaviors, your goals, your values, your skills and abilities, and who you are in that specific environment, I actually prefer starting from the core and connecting with who are you beyond all of those roles that you play in those different environments. What's your core purpose? What's your kind of bigger dream and intention? What makes you truly alive? And then from there, look at how can I manifest more of myself in all those different environments, and how can I make sure that they align on the values, on, behaviors, that there's no conflict, that by growing your career, you're not sacrificing your family, by, having a child, you're not going to have to sacrifice your business, and all of these different aspects of conflicts that we're creating very often. So I think if we start with environment, or any box of the system that could be, it's easier to just fit in and feel safe. But also for kind of true personal growth and development, we'd invite you to kind of look at the inside out process and look at, who am I really? How can I bring my whole self to all of these different environments and those different parts of your identity? So you can be whole self regardless of change, of circumstances, of pressures, and so on. So
certainly. And bringing in that whole self and aspects of our identities into environments that we might otherwise feel nervous about bringing them into can open our eyes actually to so much that can offer, and that others will want to receive as well. So it's kind of a little bit of an encouragement to just bring out some of those parts of your identity that and who you are, and connect with that core self, because it benefits others as well as benefiting you.
Yeah, it's a huge topic, and I know we could speak about this for the rest of the day, because also I'd like to do a PhD on this topic as well, of kind of neurobiological aspects of identity, and how it's created. And hopefully one day I'll be able to do that. And if you have any questions, please feel free just to drop it for us in the comments, and have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks, Valentina.